It's wonderful to come to the end of a week and stand before you to share some Torah. It's also wonderful to see the Aaronsons. You've been away for a long pandemic, and we're glad to see you. And Ben, you came and you said, "Hi, Rabbi." I'm hoping that's Ben and not Max.
It's Max.
That's Max?
Yes, it is.
Oh, yeah. The pandemic's been that long? Jane, did you recognize Max? No.
We were
Okay.
having that conversation about was that paramedic.
Right.
I see his smile and I know who it is.
So it is love. That's why we come, and that's why we gather to see each other, to spend this time together. And our Torah portion is Ekev, and Ekev is one of those that has these beautiful quotes from Deuteronomy that are so close to my heart. There's the statement of the 7 species of the land of Israel, personal challenge to see if I can grow all of them and harvest them in the state of Florida. But there's also a beautiful line of V'alchata v'savata v'erachta et Adonai Elohecha al ha'aretz ha'tova asher natan la. That you shall eat and be satisfied, and that you shall then bless God for the good land that God is giving you. It's an amazing text. It's part of that reminder. It's in Birkat Hamazon. So when you have a meal with bread, afterwards you're supposed to say Birkat Hamazon, the grace after meals. And we even say that verse from Deuteronomy. You're supposed to eat and be satisfied and praise. And I share that with you tonight, and I started thinking about, if I'm speaking about al-kata v'savata v'erachta, of eat and be satisfied, that I should be really in blessing. I should be thinking of like those favorite meals, right? We all have them, those times where we can have these incredible taste memories. And the one that came to mind is actually a bit problematic. We were in North Carolina. We were on a rather incredible excursion. And I might be mixing some of my various excursions that I had, because I think it might have been the summer that Jill was pregnant with Nathaniel, which tells you how long ago it is, given that he's now 16 and driving. And it could have been another trip. All I remember, one way makes it worse than the other, but it doesn't matter on some level. We stopped to get ice cream. We love ice cream in our house. It's one of our favorite desserts that we will go great lengths. And we went and had ice cream. And I ordered the ice cream. And it was coffee ice cream. I love coffee ice cream. Jill and I actually fell in love over coffee ice cream. Great coffee ice cream. And then it had chocolate in it. You all know I love chocolate. It had toffee in it. I took a bite and it was like, oh, this is so good. This could be my favorite bite of ice cream. And then my beautiful, lovely, incredible wife looks at me and sticks her spoon in and takes a bite of the best ice cream I had ever eaten. I was in the middle of al-chalta v'savata v'erachta. I was doing it. I was eating it. I was going to eat all of it. I was going to be satisfied. And I was going to praise. And my wife stole a bite. I was indignant. I was mean. I was like, get off my ice cream. Eat your ice cream. She did have ice cream. Now, remember what I just told you. Either the worst version is that she was actually pregnant with Nathaniel at the time. So I am telling my pregnant wife, don't eat my ice cream. That's the worst version of it. The less worst version, which is still pretty bad, is I still told my beautiful, lovely, incredible wife, who is always so giving and generous, don't eat my ice cream. Either way, it doesn't matter. I'm al-chalta v'savata v'erachta. It's great. I'm enjoying my ice cream. I'm being satisfied and I'm blessing, but to not share it. And that to me is part of the beauty of Parshat Ekev, is because even as it tells us to enjoy the bounty of the land, you also get this incredible place, and I mentioned it earlier, where you get the second paragraph of Shema, which for a variety of reasons kind of fell away out of Reformed liturgy. It has been finding its way back in. And part of the reason is because it repeats that you shall, has it a sign upon your hand and as a symbol on your doorpost. You've heard that stuff in Va'ahavta, right? that you shall love the Lord your God and set it as a sign between your eyes and as a symbol on your arm, and all of those. It kind of repeats what we have in Deuteronomy 6. It repeats it again here in Deuteronomy 11, and they're like, we said it once. How many times do we have to repeat it? But what they lost, or what is in Deuteronomy 11 that's not in Deuteronomy 6, is what I forgot that day in North Carolina eating. Did I mention how good that ice cream was? It was really, really good. But I lost something in that moment. In Deuteronomy 6, when we go, V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, it's all in singular. It's you. It's directed to each one of us as individuals. What is valuable and important, even if we're repeating the instructions in Parshat Ekev here in Numbers, is it's you, plural. One of the instructions is that each of us as an individual has to use our eyes to bring love into the world and use our hands to let it be God's mark on the doorposts of our house and on our gates. That is individual and personal. There is responsibility. But here in Parshat Ekev, there's another piece of it, which is you. Plural. A collective, a community, a group. We reinforce each other as we live out those instructions. And that's what I forgot with that bowl of ice cream. With that taste of ice cream, that al-chata v'savata uverachta, that eating and being satisfied and praising, how much better it is when it's not just you having that bite and saying, that's really good, but when you sit down with people, with a community, with loved ones, and you just enjoy that bite together. When you share the taste of something good, or you share a recipe. It's one of the reasons why it is so much fun and it is wonderful. And to you folks on Zoom, I am so sorry that you don't get to enjoy the challah tonight. It is a s'mores challah with marshmallow and chocolate. If you come for services tomorrow morning, it will be cocoa nibs, chocolate chips with cinnamon and sugar on top. It's it's so fun to make the challah because I get to share it. When I bring my challah, and I'm guessing the same for Emily, when you get to take the challah and see the smile on everybody's face, and you get to, we say hamotzi al chata, the savata uverachta, that we eat and you're satisfied and you praise, how much better it is, how important, how much more weight it has when it's not just me eating an entire loaf of challah. I haven't done that in a while. But I just get the tiniest little sliver because everybody else here has taken their slice. Part of the blessing and experience of appreciating the food we have is the way we use our food to build connection between people and communities that support us and amplify the blessings we would offer. That is part of Ekev. But there's another piece as well. Because it also says in this parsha, it's not by bread alone. God didn't just sustain us in the wilderness by giving us manna, by providing us bread. There's all sorts of other stuff. All of our thoughts, all of our emotions, all of those moments of human connection, those are part of what sustain us. And as we think about food appreciation and the bounty of the land, we also have to appreciate all of those interactions in human relationships. And I was listening to NPR earlier this week, and I was thinking about Parshat Ekev, and there was this story that just caught my attention, because it was something just so simple, and yet it was so extraordinary. How many of you know the Hudson Valley in New York? Got some hands that have gone up. That's north of Tennessee, I know, somewhere. The Mississippi, you can't take the Mississippi out of me. So in the Hudson Valley, there is a small newspaper. Small, just little local, hyper-local, they called it on NPR. And the editor was a woman named Emily Sacker. And she was in need of an editor, and when you look for a job in this day and age, what do? you put it on the internet. And so she put it on the internet, and she wasn't getting a whole lot of applications. And then lo and behold, she thinks it's from Russia. It turns out it's from Ukraine. Pavel Kuljak. He's 44 years old. He's a journalist. He's living in eastern Ukraine. And he never really been an editor before. He's never been to the Hudson Valley before. He doesn't write or speak English very well. But, you know, he would like to try it because he's like to be able to speak English. He thinks he's got some good stories. He thinks he can help her out. Now, again, did I mention he doesn't really speak a lot of English? That he lives in eastern Ukraine. He's never been an editor, and she's like, wait, what am I going to do with this? She starts some correspondence back and forth with him, and it turns out that he is, like her, loves numbers. He loves data, he loves statistics, and she had done a lot of her reporting using data from different places to be able to find stories in the data. But she had been stuck on this, trying to look at landlords and rents in her area in the Hudson Valley. She had been stuck. She sent the information to him because he had been researching through local community databases in her area looking at dog ownership and dog licenses. She's like, wait, why is he researching dog licenses? He's like, I just like playing with numbers. She's like, wait, if you can research that, maybe you can help me. And what happens? In 3 hours, where she had been stuck for weeks and months, he solves it, and is able to help her figure out and get moving back on their story again. And so it starts them going back and forth, her asking him to write some stories, to do some editing, and him getting back to her. Now, one of the other things that is quite interesting in this Torah portion is there is this place where it says in this text that don't let your eyes and your heart stray, don't start looking after other gods, don't turn away from God's paths. And there's a lot of commentary on that statement of sometimes it's easy to get complacent, to get bored, to get to this place where we're tuning out stuff. We're not paying attention because we think we've either heard it all or seen it all or what can really be awesome and wonderful in the world. And that kind of happens with Pavel's stories. People started to kvetch a little bit, right? We live in the Hudson Valley. I don't care about this guy, Pavel, who is living in the Ukraine, and he's talking about how tall his beans are growing. Pavel had a lot of childhood trauma, and you might be aware that there's a war going on in Ukraine. You all have heard that. So between the childhood trauma that meant he didn't really like to go out that much, he took care of his gardens and his orchards, he took care of his cat, and the war going on, he wasn't getting out a whole lot, and so his stories, they were starting to get a little bit flat. But something interesting happened. And that moment to push back against the complacency, and that moment to think about how we sustain and feed each other, what real blessing is a couple of different things. One, as you watch in the story as it develops, what happens is Amy asks Pavel for something and gives him a little bit of a nudge, and he's able to go back and get a story. What happens from Pavel's side of it is if you're in the Hudson Valley, it's hard to get an understanding of what it feels like to live in eastern Ukraine right now. And through his eyes, the people that were reading that paper started to get a sense of what it meant. One of the great stories that went back and forth is that he starts telling the story of how far he had to walk to feed the cat every day. That's one of the challenges, one of the silly everyday things that is so easy to take for granted, and yet he would go day after day feeding the cat, taking care of the cat, making sure it was go in the midst of all of the war. And so what would happen is the two of them, again, al chata v'savata uverachta. Are we fed? How are we sustained? How do we make sure we bless that? What happened? Is the two of them, as you watch back and forth across the story, is Amy was feeding Pavel and giving him connection and moments, and Pavel was then feeding back to Amy and to her readers. offering them insight and wisdom and image that they would never have seen before. The end of the story is what really captured me. Right? Pavel didn't go out. He didn't really talk to his neighbors. He talked to his wife, his garden. That was his bubble. He liked living in it. And yet, as he ventured out, and she asked him to write incredible stories. There's a beautiful story they were describing in this NPR piece where he was talking about the different kinds of coverings people were putting on their windows in order to protect their windows from the ravages of war. Everything from scraps of carpet, which he said apparently were the best, that protected from the concussion, to plywood, as we know from our hurricane stuff. But he said some of the best protection was the icons and statues that people would, of their ancestors, that would put in the window to protect from the concussion of the shell. Again, giving those images, what was it like just being in a tiny village in eastern Ukraine? But what was extraordinary to me is each level of reporting, he went further and further out of his bubble. Because Amy was listening, and because that community was listening and interested in his stories, he went further and further to the point where he started interviewing his neighbors, where he started talking to the people of the village, where he started building community in his place. I started off by telling you that I had the most amazing ice cream, and I was fussy about sharing it. And yet here in Ekev, as we are reminded not to be complacent, as we are reminded to look for community, as we're reminded to see how we are fed, whether it is literal bread that we eat or the sustenance we get from incredible relationships, that we must eat, we must be satisfied, we must be blessed. May all of us take those moments of appreciation. May we, and there was a whole nother, just the simplest level, think about it. I, ironically, was driving to get dinner when I heard that story. Right? I was out hunting up a pizza for my son so that he could eat dinner. And what happened as I listened to that story? I was fed spiritually. I was sustained after a long day to hear that story of human connection and human beauty, and I bring it and share it with you tonight to be a blessing. Amen. Shabbat Shalom.